is a leader on it, and I think I probably got through the leader as it starts now. So I'll start by saying that this is an interview with Donn Black, and it's always one of those interesting spellings of Donn. I know two people who spell their name D-O-double-N, and I've forgotten, Don, whether there's a middle initial in there.
L.
Donn, and it's not Donn L. It's Donn L. Black, who is Lafayette's first mayor. And the other voice that you hear is George Wasson, but that doesn't make any real difference here. Don, say something so they'll know which voice it is that's yours.
All right, I'm sitting further away from the mic, so I'll be more difficult to hear.
All right, Don, the purpose of this is that the Historical Society likes to keep a record of as many historical voices as we can find, and there have been a number of people's voices, old-timers who have lived in the area for a long time. For instance, the most recent one is Dr. Filer. They spent an hour or so taking. He's one of the very, very early citizens in Lafayette. But that's they're kept in the library in Lafayette, and some years from now, when you can send your grandchildren around, so
that'll be great.
It'll be your voice. Now, what I'd like to know is, you are Lafayette's first mayor, and unfortunately, the purpose of recording this right now is that you're getting ready to leave Lafayette, and we'll get to that in a moment. But tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, and when you first came to Lafayette, maybe where you were born.
Both Arlene and I grew up in the state of Oregon. I grew up in Baker, over in the eastern side of the state. Arlene grew up in Oswego, suburb of Portland, although actually Arlene was born in Oakland, but migrated to Oregon at a very early age. We both went to college at Oregon State and met there. Then I went on to law school at NYU. Arlene went to Europe, and it was during that time that a lot of our friends from Oregon who had come to the Bay Area and were so enthusiastic, and we were a little nervous about the Portland climate, where I had a job in a law firm, but we decided to come to the Bay Area and bask in the sunlight of California. So that's what we did in 1959. And so our first daughter was actually born in Palo Alto. Shortly after I got out of the Air Force, we'd been in France for 3 years in the Air Force. And I came to Stanford as a teaching fellow. Stayed there a year to get bar passed. Arlene's family lived in Orinda, and it just so happened when we first arrived that we babysat Grandma's house, who was then leaving for Europe for 2 months. And as the time approached that she was coming back, and I had then taken a job with my personal law firm in Oakland, we just started looking for a place to live by fanning out in Orinda. And we first rented a duplex in Sunset Village that we found by simply seeing a for rent sign on the lawn. After the duplex got too small, we then bought a house about a half block away in Sunset Village, where we lived until 1967, when that became too small. That's when Alex arrived, and then we moved to this house on Spring Hill Road, and have been here since.
You've mentioned your children just by name. How many children do you have? And maybe I guess the thing to do is to say when they were born rather than say how old they are right now.
It'd be hard to remember. Let's see. Kathy is the oldest. She was born in 1959, right after we got back. Then Jenny, who's now at UCLA, was second, and she was born the following year in 1960. Then Alex, who's just graduating from Acalanes this week, or next week, was born in 61. So obviously something about the air in California that produces children.
Yeah, well, 2 girls and a boy, that's the same kind of a range that we have, except our boy is first and then the 2 girls. Don, one of the things that the place I guess where I first ran into you was working on you were active in the design project. You might talk a little bit about that, or any other thing that you'd like to talk about, how you got first interested in the city, or in Lafayette, before it was a city.
Well, it was actually after we purchased the house in Sunset Village, and I'd become a little active in the local improvement project. Sunset Village Improvement Project. We had a variety of neighborhood challenges, as every neighborhood has from time to time. And
notably a service station that was on the
right, an old Mexico station that was a real problem for everybody. And I can't remember any of the biggies. The one that really got us going my first time I remember getting interested in anything outside the neighborhood was we were worried that, let's see, I can't remember exactly how it was. It looked like somebody was going to purchase the property along Mount Diablo Boulevard behind the Texaco station on the boulevard side of the creek, and for various reasons I can't now remember, that made it look like maybe a commercial would jump the creek and get into Sunset Village. So as good homeowners, we got excited, and the design project happened to be working on a beautification project right along that same area. The idea was, or maybe it was we were trying to interest the design project in planting some kind of plants along Mount Diablo Boulevard at that point, in an effort to make the area look so good that nobody would have the nerve to turn it into commercial property. I can remember Stan White was then president of the design project, and I wrote him a letter and told him how important all of this was. He called me back the minute he got the letter and said, come join the design project. And just so happened that I was a little worried. I mean, in Lafayette really didn't feel like hometown at the time, and I think I was kind of looking for something, some way to become involved. And so that came all at a very nice time. I was just getting interested in what was happening beyond down the street, and needing to get involved in the community, and I got that invitation to come join the design project, and that project was 63. And I think it would have been very shortly thereafter that you and I met, when of course you were so active in the Improvement Association, and during those years the Improvement Association and the design project were acting like de facto governments as best we could, and so all of the people in those two organizations got together a lot, I recall.
I don't recall when the first attempt at incorporation started in Lafayette, but I think it was before you got here, and I know it was, well, I got here before you did, so it was before the two of us were here. But were you involved in the second effort at incorporation?
I frankly can't remember which the first one was. I think there had been an abortive one way back in 40 or something.
I think
But just precisely after we arrived, first time we voted in Lafayette, incorporation was on the ballot. And I can remember deciding to vote against it because I didn't understand its implications and thought the status quo was the way to go.
Almost exactly the same thing. I remember having worked a little bit against it, really. Although the Improvement Association, well, it really didn't take a whole big stand on it. It was one of those things that people do it. But then the next time around, you were very, very active. But well, before we get to that, then you did become very active in the design project thing, and the chairman of it, I guess.
Yeah, I was chairman for a couple of years. In fact, it was right during that time that the design project, I don't think it was my idea, it was kind of a committee idea, decided to see what could be done about, at least moving toward the idea of incorporating it. It wasn't as though a decision had been made that we should incorporate, although I think that was the disposition, at least the design project. But the idea was that it really ought to be carefully looked at. The big frustration for us right at that moment was the sign situation in Lafayette. We kept trying to work with the county, and the county kept promising us that we'd have an ordinance, but we somehow never did. I think now I see that it was just that the staff couldn't get to it. They had other more pressing things to do. But I think more than any other one thing, it was our frustration over not being able to do anything about signs that made us start looking at the importance of having our own government to be able to do things like that. And so a committee was appointed, I remember so vividly. It was Ned Robinson and Bill Chilcote. And I think Walt Minley, it was a year after I'd been chairman, and Walt Minley was chairman that year, and he appointed this committee and told the three of us to go out there and see what might be done about getting something going. And we talked to a number of others, I'm sure you and other representatives of the Improvement Association and a lot of property owners, Chamber of Commerce, and it was finally agreed that the thing to do was to put together a study. And so we got a few dollars together, I think finally about $3,000. John Kennedy got all that money. I'm still not sure where he got it. He did a good job with it. And hired Griffin Hagen Krager to give a report that reflected then went out to see what the finances of the situation would be for Lafayette, and what the level of service would turn out to be, the areas where we could improve, in terms of police service, fire, and so that was really quite an interesting exercise. Everybody took an assignment. One group was to figure out what the population would be, another group figure out the deal about the fire service, somebody else what planning was going to cost. And so we put together kind of a pro forma budget, both of income and outgo, and found out we wouldn't have to have property tax. So we were convinced, and it turned out to be accurate.
That's, we might dwell a little bit on that. For instance, one of the things that made it work out so good was the timing on the actual incorporation, if it were to occur. And did you fellows know that at the time?
Oh, yeah.
It was planned, it was contemplated. You can't do that nowadays.
Oh, was that the change? I don't know that. Oh, that was a real, I think it meant about $500,000 to Lafayette. We missed it, as a matter of fact, by about 27 days. The idea was to incorporate as near the 1st of July as possible. As near after, it had to be after. And we didn't make it until the 29th, which is the way things worked out. But that's right, we got the, as you well know, we got the, all of the subventions that cities get for that entire year after we prorated to the date of incorporation. But, as was then the rule, the county carries all the services for the year in the remainder of the year in which you incorporate. So we started out with about a $400,000 or $450,000 surplus, which was a really nice, comfortable deal.
A little bit about the campaign. It was a well done study, and I'm sure from the outcome of the study, it showed that it was a good possibility for the city of Lafayette. The objective being home rule, bring all these services right back home so that we didn't have to make all these trips to Martinez to fight windmills when we couldn't find most of the time. You might talk a little bit about how many candidates and how they went about getting so many candidates.
Well, there were 20 candidates. City council since then have been very well represented by the people that ran in that first campaign. And I think the key thing was that not a single one of those 20 candidates opposed incorporation. Therefore, that had always been true. In fact, Ned Robinson was a good example. Ned had opposed incorporation in the earlier effort, back in 59 or whatever it was. And as I recall, was actually elected to the council except for the incorporation bill. Mm-hmm. But his opinion had changed, as many others, and so every candidate was very supportive. And I think most of the candidates were out campaigning harder for incorporation than they were for themselves.
I'm going to say that was part of the scheme, really. Was if you had so many candidates, you were all assigned to different functions. You got to go to coffees, but the objective was to tell people the advantages of incorporation.
And that's right. And I think, with the study, and because it really did look like we were on solid ground with no property tax, I think that was the thing that most people were concerned about. They didn't want another layer of tax, and that's understandable. Then from the responses that everybody got, police service was really the next most important consideration. That was really attractive to an awful lot of people. And we did have inadequate police services. And then for the people working on incorporation, I think obviously the number one item was planning. That's what us workers were looking for.
Well, the incorporation did happen, and there was an election of 5 members to the city council. You might say a little bit about them if you like.
Well, it was kind of an interesting group, really. Bob Fisher just came out of the blue. He was relatively new in town, had not been particularly active on at least the kinds of organizations that we've already mentioned. In fact, I hadn't even been acquainted with Bob, but he was a well of a campaigner and a very presentable kind of guy, totally enthusiastic. Pitched in and did a great job on the incorporation campaign, and I think probably ran the best personal campaign of anybody involved. Gordon Holmes was very close second in terms of a personal campaign. And we'll never forget that he arranged to have a flyover. I don't know if you remember that banner.
Yes, I sure do.
And he, of course, was extremely think he and Bob Fisher were within 2 or 3 votes of each other in the leading located. And of course, Jack Marchand, who in some sense is Mr. Lafayette, he's been there about as long as anybody I know. And everybody in the world knew his name. And it just had done all kinds of good things for Boy Scouts and other people out of town. So he was a logical kind of guy to be elected to that first council. And then Martin Cogburn, who again, as far as I know, was not real well known in the Improvement Association design project and those kinds of circles. I think he had been very active on a county basis as a Republican politician. I guess not as an office seeker, but certainly was well connected with the Republican Party. And I knew how to get votes. I always thought that he was elected on the basis of being a CPA because everybody was very nervous about the financial situation. I think they wanted that assurance.
Yeah, we had and then of course we had with that 2 lawyers, a doctor, a builder, and a CPA. Mm-hmm. It was a nice balance in the council. As it turned out, as the council was formed and as you got to working, it didn't always end up by being a balanced situation. Yeah. It seemed like there was one guy kind of out of step with respect to the others. Quickly then on the campaigning part of it and what happened the next time around and how people got elected. The top 3 vote getters, did they get the 4-year terms or was it 2-year?
No, the top 3 vote getters were elected for 4 years, and the other 2, Cochran and I, were elected for 2 years. So the 2 of us ran again 2 years later.
And I remember, just to quickly get around to that, because you did run a second time around and you were elected, and Martin Cogburn ran, was defeated, and Jack Marchand elected not to run. He resigned from the council, so in effect there was 3 seats available the second time around, and that's when Ned Robinson was elected to the council.
Ned and Jim Davey, right.
All right, let's go back then. Now we've got the city incorporated, and now the first thing you have to do, one of the first orders of business, is to elect the mayor. And I might add that you probably wouldn't say this, but there was a very, very strong campaign. Even though, in fact, you were the low man of the vote getting, you had worked hardest it seemed, for the incorporation, and a very strong movement by a lot of people to make sure that you became the first mayor, and with the cooperation of the rest of the council, you were elected the first mayor of Lafayette. And did you serve a full, 12 months? Is that right?
No, I had a 9-month term because the election set up. The city elections still have.
No, they've moved it. They've moved it, but they used to be in March.
March, right? So it was just from July to March.
Yeah.
So that was a relatively short term, but it was an exciting term. We didn't have a city manager for 3 or 4 months.
I'm going to ask you some of what were the first problems.
And we're making it up as we went along. Fortunately, 2 really crucial things, 3 maybe happened right at that time. First of all, we had Charlie Williams available, who, as city attorney, who had been with cities for a long time. He knew the ropes pretty well, not necessarily in the formation of the city, but that we had the League of Cities, how to form a city book, and we just went down that step by step, and that was extremely helpful. And then our first city clerk was a gal, I'm embarrassed that I keep saying, I can't remember right at this moment, but was extremely knowledgeable about the inner workings of record keeping.
Can't remember her name, but she'd been the city clerk in Berkeley or something like that.
Was her name Grace?
Sounds right.
Yeah, she was a great gal. And so she served the city clerk that first year and kept us out of a lot of trouble. And then first order of business was the interview for city managers. We did interview a lot of people. And we had a lot of applications, but we went after him there. He didn't apply. We sought him out and got him to apply. And
I stole him from the city of Pittsburgh.
Stole him from Pittsburgh, right. Best thing we ever could have done. They never really forgave us, but when he was interviewed, it was just obvious from that moment that he was the choice, and everybody was totally enthusiastic. And it was one of those beautiful, obvious things that I wish there was total agreement and no doubt. And that was really So he came aboard about 4 months later, and then we got offices and we got an organization going. And, well, from then on, it's been pretty orderly.
Yeah, well, now, one of the things you had to do was to get the whole general plan worked out. And, I don't know where the concept of the 49er group came about, whether that was totally the whole council that put it together, or whether that was somebody's brainchild or anything of that sort.
Don't remember exactly how that got started. It was obvious that there was going to want to be a lot of citizen input. I'm sure that was the vehicle for getting lots of input into the general plan. It may have been that our consultant suggested that. Or it may have been a legal requirement. In any case, Norm Tuttle, as we recall, was the chairman of that effort. Another really off the tank for the city because he did such a good job for that.
Well, it was called the 49ers because there were, I remember, 7 teams of 9 or 9 teams of 7 or something.
Whatever it was.
49.
Yeah, 49. Right, and that took a long time, took 2 or 3 years, but it was well worth the effort. Gordon Hall, remember? Yeah, Gordon was the planner, and in some ways, Gordon was ahead of us. He, as I think he should have been, he was showing us ideas and alternatives and ways to go that we certainly needed to consider, many of which were adopted, but many of which were just not practical in our situation. But it was nevertheless very exciting. It irritated a lot of people. Well, mainly landowners.
Yes. That's the usual problem you have when you do become incorporated. Now you've brought everything back home, and not only do the active people have not the problem of going to Martinez any longer, but the local people have got the city council right there. They can get to them anytime they want, at least any meeting they want, with a matter of a 5-minute drive. There were some, I'm sure, pretty trying things, and maybe you can recall some of the things that maybe first upset the council in the planning stage. For instance, just as a starter, maybe you'd like to take or not take any position with respect to what we then called ZBAC.
Right. Oh, that was a terribly traumatic thing. A lot of controversy about it. You may remember that project had been approved, I think, right up to building permits by the county, or maybe building permits hadn't been issued. I guess there was a dispute about whether the city could have terminated it. And I remember at the time, I felt certain that we'd have a big lawsuit over it. But I concede that it was in a gray area of did they have vested rights. As a lawyer, you know how sort of kind of shades of gray there are in that whole business. The council was badly split on it. Finally, Jack Marchant, Martin Cogburn, and I voted for it. I voted for it not because I liked it, but because I really didn't think we could stand a big lawsuit right at that moment in time. I didn't think the thing was that bad. I think maybe, given a second shot at it, I would have voted against it. But anyway, it was very controversial, and with the first, and a year later when it was being built, of course, a lot of people wondered what the hell had happened. A lot of people were upset.
Well, here's some, incorporation did happen in 1968, and this is 1980. In fact, I haven't yet mentioned the date. This is June 1, 1980, sitting in Donn Black's living room, a very pleasant spot in the Spring Hill area. In 1980, that property is not quite as it doesn't stand out quite as much as it did then. At the time, the hillside was cleared off, and there were no trees, there was no landscaping at all, and here was this rather large apartment group right on a prominent hill. It did take a lot of attention, a lot of flack.
Right. It was. I remember Stan White made a suggestion that I think everybody wished we had if he did. He suggested doing a scale model because he was afraid that it was out of scale for the hill, and he was right. It turned out he was dead right, and that's what was really wrong with it. It's too massive for the land site. but nobody could see it from the planning perspective. Our planning commission had approved it unanimously. But I think the model would have let everyone see that there was just too much building mass there for that small hill. So it was a good lesson.
And maybe that's leading into what it really is that takes the time of the city council members. Let me add one other thing here, Donn. You and I both know, because we've both been on the council and been active in it. From the very beginning, the city council in Lafayette has been a volunteer organization. You're elected, but you don't get paid anything at all. So it isn't as though there's a great reward other than seeing this whole thing come together and see some of your dreams and hopes really be accomplished. But you don't get paid for it, so it really costs you money. In fact, having done it for the 4 years or the 2 years of the first term and then 4 years for the second term, I don't suppose you have any misgivings about having done it in the first place.
Oh no, it's really a great experience. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. Can't think of anything I would have rather done. And 6 years is about right. I think I would have not enjoyed the next time around. I don't know whether you felt that or not, but I felt myself running out of gas.
Well, I only served one term, and I could see that if you put in the next 4 years, potentially halfway through it, you might run out of gas, and that's not the commitment you ought to make. And I think, for example, there were 20 good candidates in the first incorporation effort, or first vote. There have been an adequate number of candidates almost every time, with the exception of the most recent election, where there were only 2 candidates and 2 vacancies on the council. But mostly there's been a contested effort and very good candidates. We've had good people running for the jobs.
Oh, that's right. There's no need for anyone to serve a long time on the council. There's lots of good people.
All right, now, the first thing that we've talked about in the problem of the ZBEC, what other kinds of things does the council or does the mayor get involved with? And you did serve a second term as mayor, so a few years later, so you had a shot at doing it after the city was really
No, as a matter of fact, I didn't.
Oh, you only were mayor one time?
Right. By the time the council was evolving a sort of rotation system, and as it worked out, my next term would have been the first year of that term I decided not to run for. I think one of the toughest things I had was the whole. Remember, the council decided to terminate the local fire district, and to go with consolidated in order to cut down that path, and to obtain what was perceived to be, and I think probably has proven to be, an increased level of service. But again, there were a lot of people who didn't want to see the local fire district go. And Harry Ring, who's always been a friend, but who's I think he would be the first to say, is pretty capable of being pretty ornery on his feet, was one of those who felt most deeply that it should not go. And he would come down to the council meetings and raise holy hell about it. And it became necessary for me to be assertive as the chairman of the meeting in a way that I never had to at any other time. It was almost a question of having somebody carry them out. So some of those moments were kind of exciting.
Well, that one did raise a lot of flack within the city, because it really had been a good and a very active Lafayette Fire District. But I recall the economics that we evaluated at the time. I was not on the council. I was still in the Improvement Association at that time. It was very clear that there was a great savings to be had, and the services could even be increased by joining the Consolidated Fire District. It seemed like the right thing to do, and yet there were good arguments on the other side as well, and they had people that put together that fire district that done a good job over many, many years. And it was kind of their own little child was being thrown out, so to speak.
Yeah, it seemed kind of backwards. We had just incorporated the local control, and here we were proposing to turn over our fire department to a larger governmental agency, and that rubbed some people the wrong way out. One of the funniest things with it, and one of the funniest remarks I ever heard in a public meeting happened during a debate. A lady came and argued strenuously for keeping the fire district, and her point, which was a valid point, was that the local fire district provided a lot more personal services. And Chief Scarelli, the consolidated district, was there that night to answer questions, and she turned to him and said, Mr. Scarelli, I hear, and isn't it true, that your people refuse to come out and get cats out of trees for people? And he got up and he said, yes, madam, that's true. And the reason is that so far we've never found a cat skeleton in a tree.
Yes. They do climb down.
And you read that.
Yes. The other things that we've had in Lafayette, turned over there, you were talking about police services. Would you like to
Well, one of the big things, as you know, during incorporation was to double the level of service. And that would happen because within our budget, we could, in effect, as I recall, have, for most times during the day and night, the services of two officers in our area, whereas it was pretty clear that in the county beat system, we had really for most of the time, we had only one officer. So, in round, rough numbers, we were able to double that police service. I can remember one of Stan Petter's, who was one of the candidates, dramatic stories was that he'd had an intruder in his home the prior year and had apprehended the man. Well, this was not particularly dangerous. But after calling the police, he had to sit there with this person he had arrested for some 4 or 5 or 6 hours until the police arrived to take this person off of his hands. Well, that was a very dramatic thing. And, from the copies, as you would remember, people seemed to feel that more deeply than any other one thing. I mean, people were worried and afraid about it. And we were to be thin. By any standard, we were just way too thin. So, even doubling the service certainly didn't get it up to any kind of acceptable standard by as those norms go. The problem was, of course, that in contracting with the county, well, you know more about this than I do because you got to live with the problem after it developed. Really, in the first 2 or 3 years of the contract service, it worked very satisfactorily. The county was assigning good men to us, and they tended to stay, and some of them became personal friends of everybody, and they knew the kids, and in those early years, it seemed to work very well. Costs kept jumping up, but so did costs for everything else. But then I know from having talked to you and others that there got to be problems of coordination, control, and
Well, I think partly because the police officers, of course, wanted to see themselves having an opportunity to grow on up through to the job of lieutenants and so forth, and it wasn't going to be that in Lafayette if they stayed very long, because it was really going to be a very small group. And then we did join with Moraga when Moraga finally incorporated a kind of joint police force, which again increased the services to Lafayette and the services for Moraga, and kept our costs down some more, and I thought that was working out very well. And all of a sudden now Moraga decided they wanted their own department, and so we are now back to contracting with the county again. I think we're still getting good services. It's a matter of what you pay for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the major items of expense.
Mm-hmm. The other kind of serious big expense that the city will always have is the maintenance of roads, and the way our community is laid out with several valleys. We have some major thoroughfares that handle the traffic, and unfortunately they are not wide boulevard type streets. They, with the exception of Lafayette Boulevard, but like your road out here in Spring Hill and ours down in Burton Valley and Moraga Road going up over the hill, they are difficult roads to maintain, and if something happens to them, a lot of expense. Anything to say about that?
Yeah, I went through a sort of a metamorphosis about roads out of my experience on the council. Of course, the issue about was it, 99?
77, 93.
Yeah, 77, 93, kind of came up then. The Shepherd Canyon right away was being abandoned and so on, so that debate started. That has certainly gone on a long time. But originally I thought that would be a good idea. And I can remember we talked to Senator Nedgley about it. He thought it would be a good idea, and turned out an awful lot of citizens didn't think it would be a good idea. And so, as you well know, it got looked at more and more carefully. And in the process of all that, I think I finally came to realize that there really wasn't any way that we were going to be able to build enough roads to keep traffic congestion from building up from time to time. I mean, it's all. I finally bought the theory that that roads almost generate their own traffic, and of course, as citizens along the route pointed out, there are other problems. The bigger the roads get, and so on, the more of a burden they are on the people along the right of way, and the expense. Really, the expense was just out of hand. We certainly were not going to have enough money to even start a project like that, and that was about the time the state was cutting back. So I'm kind of glad that worked out for the best. I know there's a lot of disagreement about that, and God knows Springfield's a dangerous affair to live, and there are a lot of dangerous roads in town. But I don't know. I think as long as I guess I've decided we just have to put up with some traffic congestion. We have to spend a little more time driving from here to there, and that's probably a better solution than trying to accommodate every problem to the maximum. I want to tell you a little story, another little lesson that we learned in the early days. Every time there would be a question about putting on a new stop sign or making some new road improvement, of course, it got referred to the engineer, to the what do they call it, the road engineer over in Public Works. And invariably, the engineer would come by and say, no, that'll cut down the efficiency of the road, and that road is... Well, it was almost a year before he finally figured out that the only point of view the engineer would take would be a very mathematical calculation about how many cars could you get down that road, and that's all they were looking at. And so, of course, it always was true that if you put a stop sign on a corner, it theoretically cut down the number of cars that could get through that road. But that had very little to do with how the neighborhood perceived the safety situation, or what the noise situation was, or anything else. And so, finally, I know we did put in a stop sign for about a year, but finally when everybody got that figured out, where the engineer was coming from, then the stop signs to control speed started popping up all over the town.
I think we probably all agree that they don't necessarily control speed, but they sure help every now and then to make somebody slow down.
Right.
And they don't all observe them, of course.
Well, your neighborhood is a prime example, I think. The Silverado has got a number of new stop signs. I must admit, it slows me down.
It isn't very popular. And in the wee hours of the morning, I think they're more likely to be unobserved. Yeah. In fact, almost many times during the day. But one thing to get a little more closer to your part of home here, here we are in the middle of Spring Hill, and one of the big pushes nowadays is to save the Buckeye Ranch, which is right on up your road here, so as long as you live here anyway. You have any comments about that?
Well, it appears, I mean, number one, I sure would like to see it saved. It's a unique facility that we're fortunate to have, and it's just amazing the people you run into that use it. I see people in Oakland all over that use Buckeye. But unfortunately, the land up there is so expensive that the only hope of saving it, I think, is the park district. And unfortunately, whereas there's no doubt they would be interested, their financing has been so seriously curtailed by Prop 13 that they can't. I mean, they just don't have money. And it's now evident that there's not the local money, I mean the volunteer money to do it, so there's doomed. But it's really
another push to try to save it, but I think I'd have to agree it's a great amount of money to come up with.
Yeah,
but it would, if it were to go to subdivisions, you certainly would have more traffic on Spring Hill Road.
That's true.
They would have put 3 or 4 stop signs right down there.
Yeah, same thing would happen. Well, and you also know about the walkway project that's a little controversial. It's really a question of whose ox is gored. Right. That's always part of the problem. And in this neighborhood, everybody's in favor of the walkway walkway, of course, except the people who are going to lose some of what they perceive to be their front yard. It's almost all public right of way, but it's been used by the adjoining owner for so long that really the landscaping and the whole thing is kind of into that area. So I can understand how they...
Well, it's too bad you don't have an old Sacramento and Northern right of way that runs through the middle here like we do out in our area. That's a great kind of a thing to have. Two other things I'd like to talk to you about. One, you are leaving town and going into Oakland, and I don't know whether you want to comment about why you're leaving this grand and glorious city of Lafayette.
Well, sure. It's we bought this precise house because of its location. We had kids that were just starting school, and it's so ideal for that. They walk through both grade school and high school. Now they're all out of school, and so we don't need that location any longer. As you know, I work in Oakland, and so I'm really kind of anxious to cut down that commute. That's part of it. Since being on the Lafayette Council, the fact is I've become more and more involved in Oakland civic matters. I'm going to be president of the Rotary Club there year after next, and that's next year. That's going to take a lot of being in town meetings and early mornings, and that's not the big concern, but I think it's just a question of getting closer and closer and more involved there in part. But more than anything, it has to do with the children now being out of school and no longer needing, number one, the really great weather, the swim club, the schools, and all those things. So now other kinds of considerations start to enter, and even our house is no longer really the kind of house that we would imagine for pretty much just the two of us. And that's one of the things we've done, is to get a different kind of a house that works better for the two of us. In fact, it's a smaller house in Utah, but it's got no yard.
Well, and the other thing I wanted to say, whether you want to or not comment about it, while you've been involved in politics in Lafayette, Mrs. Black, Arlene Black, has been involved with other elective offices in Lafayette, having been on the school board. You want to comment about her activities and those things?
Sure. That's right. Arlene has been very active in local school affairs, and from that, she became interested in statewide school issues. And a short time after she was no longer on the school board here, she became involved in the statewide PTA organization, ultimately became their Sacramento lobbyist, learned the ropes of lobbying in that way, and then was employed by the California division of the AAW, the American Association of University Women, and so for 2 or 3 years now she's been their state lobbyist in Sacramento, and has just recently taken on another client, which is a national association that publishes textbooks, school textbooks. And so she's, during legislative sessions, spends a great deal of time in Sacramento, several days a week. So, in that sense, her focus and interests are really outside the community of Lafayette now, as well. Now, her commute's going to be complicated a little bit by going into Oakland, but that's...
Maybe we could plant the seed for you to run for state elective offices from that part of the Bay, and then you and Arlene can meet in Sacramento more regularly.
Right. Well, Arlene tells me about what happens in Sacramento. I'm plenty glad not to be there.
How about your children? Any of them expressed any interest in politics? Or?
No, not a bit. It's just amazing that we've had a hard time getting them really interested even in school organizational stuff, although Alex is taking a stab or two at it. But no, they're busily trying to figure out what it is they're going to do career-wise and so on, as all kids are these days. But they all seem to be heading off in different kinds of directions than either Arlene and I had found for us.
Well, I don't suppose at the time that you were in high school you contemplated becoming Lafayette's first mayor or even getting involved in an incorporation drive in any kind of a community, probably as I didn't even know what the heck incorporation was all about.
Yeah, last week couldn't spell it, this week we are.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose that's true. Especially the kids, we see them, as you watch your kids, see them change their mind about every second week. Although our oldest girl is apparently now settled in on the idea of building restoration and residential restoration. Seems to be kind of a nice time for that. So
that's a good point to raise right now. One of the things that the Historical Society, for instance, is very much interested in is to restore the old buildings that are still kind of behind the facade. Some of them are available and can be seen from the little Plaza Park right at the corner of Moraga Road and Mount Diablo Boulevard. It's one of those things, again, that takes more money than anybody could even conceive putting together right now, but it would be nice to restore that. Maybe we get your thoughts.
Yeah,
what's
terrific.
How would you feel about it?
Great idea. Great idea. Again, you know, it gives me an opportunity to mention something I think Lafayette could do and finance perhaps, and that would be a kind of memorial park arrangement. I got the idea of passing through Ashland, Oregon, and you may know the beautiful little park, Lafayette Park, we have there in connection with the Shakespeare thing, the Mississippi Park. This is not the basis upon which that's done, but that kind of really beautiful setting with the kind of plants, trees, and so on that are worthy of nature tours and so on. For Lafayette, could maybe on one of the trails, or maybe to find a suitable location someplace around the plaza. I even went down and looked at that lot beside the Park Theater. It doesn't quite work, but it has possibilities with the creek there and then going on over into Chateau de Lafayette and so on. The idea would be that the city would provide the legal framework and the impetus, and put together a kind of schedule of improvements that people could sponsor in a memorial kind of way. For example, a landscape architect could plot out the kind of trees that we really need to make it a beautiful spot, restful area, and a walkway and a fountain and this and that, and a grove with a little duck pond or whatever. And people who wanted to, in memory of someone else, living or dead, could sponsor one of those improvements, and then there could be a suitable plaque or whatever. And it seems to me that is something that we might look at someday.
Well, that's the kind of concept that our society would like to kind of get people interested in, because again, you say one person is not going to come up necessarily with, let's say, $100,000 to do a thing. But there are conceivably 100 families or 100 people who might come up with $1,000.
Sure, certainly.
And we don't care whether it comes in one lump or whether it comes in 100 pieces. It'd be nice to have it all together. And again, as you say, with a plan. In fact, we have set aside, that is, we, the Historical Society, have set aside a chunk of our bank accounts or our assets for seed money in the effort to try to restore those buildings that are along the front of the Plaza Park there. And again, it could be the same thing. It's a memorial. It could be a memorial fund, and if it generates as seed, if it could generate some additional funds, eventually when you get $5,000 or $10,000 together, you can do a thing. As you know, also in that same area, there is an acute shortage of parking, and eventually, if some of those buildings are going to be remodeled or something like that, there probably have to be some of them torn down and other areas converted into parking. And rather than have it all become just one big, large parking lot, it'd be nice to have some of that in the form of a park. Maybe we can do it.
Well, if anyone has any doubt about how a park like that can be used, we ought to send them to that park in Ashland, Oregon. It's really a joy to watch people enjoy that scene. So many people sitting there, relaxing, watching the swan Lafayette has not been able to do. There is one thing about our starting out on a no property tax basis. We did severely limit ourselves. Mm-hmm. And somehow that's always seemed a little incongruous to me. I don't know why. I've often thought about it. Lafayette is a city of gorgeous individual properties. And maybe that's the underlying problem. That's what it is. The people are so focused and so intent on their own half acre that there isn't energy left over for the common areas of the city.
Well, I think we can still have the gorgeous individual properties and still have some benefits from even a small amount of tax. You recall when we had to drive for open space, and we had to drive for a recreation district. It's a matter of a few cents. And admittedly, it does grow, and it isn't a tax. But eventually, you get something done. If you just limit yourself to having no tax and providing the services that no taxes will provide, you can very well be status quo for a long time. But the other thing I was kind of thinking, it would be nice had the reservoir been the center of the city rather than at one end of the city. And as you know, the reservoir, or the center of the city is there because of the old logging trail that went out from Lafayette Boulevard out through Moraga to where many years ago there were large redwood forests. Too bad that road didn't go out along the edge of the reservoir, and we'd have this nice park with a big reservoir beside it, and the city offices were out looking.
That would be gorgeous.
You'd never go to Oakland.
Barely. Well, Rudy, we think of going to Oakland as just moving down the road a piece. It is admittedly outside of Lafayette, but I have no doubt we'll be back very often. That we're adding some cafe barbers, and so we'll be back there weekend mornings all the time. And so many great people and friends here that we.
Well, speaking of people, any other names, not people that are on council, but just other residents of Lafayette? Who do you think of out in the Happy Valley area?
You know, as having contributed a lot to the city? Yeah. Well, Mary Page has got to be mentioned. She always wants to take a very silent backstage role in everything, but more than almost anyone I can think of, she has been the idea lady in so many of the city's campaigns, certainly in incorporation, and other kinds of projects. Marvelous in terms of coming up with great ideas and ways to do it. Bob Kahn, rascal that he is in some ways, and he admitted to me one time that you can't write a successful newspaper column unless you exaggerate. And I suppose that's true. But there's a very creative guy. And I have no doubt has the best interest of Lafayette.
Bob Augenthaler.
Oh, yeah. There's a principle.
And his son coming along. Fine things in the city.
Well, there's so many,
well, you said Jack Marchant has been very active, a big supporter of the community. Kennedy.
Oh, yeah. John was just stalwart. You mentioned Dr. Fire. In the early days, he was a real worker. You know, Bucksford View, remember that? That was Dr. Fire's idea. Bucksford View. There's a lot of money that way. And Stan White, who I guess Stan doesn't live in Lafayette anymore, does he?
I don't think he does. I think he still owns some properties, and so he is around the community every now and then.
Lou Repetto, as you know Lou very well, in the early days was one of those guys that moved a lot of things along. I'm trying to think of people that go way back. Got to give Percy Whitten a lot of credit for keeping things stirred up.
And also for planting trees. You talk about trees along the way there.
Right.
Percy's probably contributed more Japanese flowering cherry trees and redwood trees all around our community.
That's right. Yeah. Good citizens. Oh, a lot of good people. Not to, constantly ignoring the people that have been on the council since we incorporated, but in a way, that's the pay, I guess, from the council business is the glory, the recognition. Whereas there are so many people that contributed just as much along the way that really aren't recognized. But they know what to do.
Don, I don't know just exactly how much more time we have on the tape, and I would hate to have the buzzer go off right in the middle of a sentence, but maybe what we can do is to wind this up now, and then if we have some more time, we can either fill it out or forget about it and save it. I want to thank you very much for spending an hour almost here on a Sunday afternoon in your house, and I've taken you away from some of your other duties, like unfortunately packing your boxes of things to take out of our community. We're going to be sorry to see you and Arlene and your family go. We appreciate all you've done for the city over the years, and I might add that while this will go down in history as an interview with Lafayette's first mayor, he's not an old man with a gray beard or anything like that. He's a very reasonably young and active and very respected, very competent, capable attorney in Oakland. You mentioned the name of the firm, or you mentioned the firm, you didn't mention their name. I don't know what it was. Yes. They can look you up in the telephone directory. Right there someplace. Really appreciate having you spend some time doing this, and you can mark it down in your diary, and your children can say, well, anytime they want to, they can come out to Lafayette, go to the public library, and ask for the taped interview with Donn Black, Lafayette's first mayor.
Well, that's a real honor and a privilege, not only to have been mayor, of course, I know you feel that too, but to think of being sort of preserved for posterity. So I appreciate that a lot. That's a good idea.
Thank you, Don.